Hi, I'm Jules Sandison for FionaDobson.com, and today we're talking about first steps into transition. The first steps into transition are far from decisive. I can only speak for myself with regard to this, and as a middle-aged man, beginning to realize my world was not quite the world I thought it was, my own first steps were decidedly hesitant. At this point, there's no hard and fast idea that I was going to transition and become a woman. Instead, I simply found that how I expressed my gender was going to shift a bit. I found that shifting to a more androgynous style of clothing just felt a lot more comfortable, but really clothing was to become just a very small part of this. I'll come back to that in a later video, but it's one of the most obvious in the early stages. What was far more telling was how I began to think about things, particularly how I began to think about myself. I found YouTube and various blogs very helpful as I began to learn much more about gender. I know that many people at this stage despair at the thought that they'll never really pass as a woman, and again, I'll come back to some of those aspects of this in a later video. For the moment, you can probably appreciate that this is quite a confusing time. I certainly found myself reluctant to go too far for fear of upsetting close family. However, this is also a moment you start to feel a sense of relief as you present just slightly more androgynously, and you feel a sense of confirmation that this is the right path, that it can work. Your closer friends will notice a little bit of a shift, but what I found was that people were generally very accepting, and I live in a very liberal city, Vancouver, but really nobody was that concerned that I was beginning to look just a little bit more feminine in my appearance, but feeling a lot more sensitive to the people around me and generally behaving in just a slightly gentler manner. Now, for me, there was no great announcement saying, I'm trans, start using the proper pronouns. No, it was far more subtle a shift. I was merely embracing a little more sensitive approach to life. Yet that shift was just the start of a journey, which as time goes on, felt increasingly like the right thing for me to do. The first steps are much more about how I see myself rather than how others see me. So I started to choose behavior that felt more feminine to me and choosing a few activities which previously I'd perceived as being something my women friends would do. Now, becoming more androgynous can feel very comfortable, and if you have family, particularly children who may not be quite ready to accept this more feminine version of yourself, it might be as far as you choose to go for a while. A more feminine cut of jeans, a lamb's wool sweater, can look just as good on a man or a woman, and the addition of just a little bit of makeup can become a natural and comfortable look. It's sometimes at this stage that you experience something most trans people have to face. You discover that the reason you don't push this further is that you're worried about how your family, your wife and your kids, are going to feel about what you're doing. You start to realize that an aspect of this journey is about protecting them. It falls to us to protect the feelings of those around us. And you're going to find that a very common theme throughout this particular side of your life. You're going to have to learn to be the one who accommodates others' feelings. This is just part of it. I always suggest that people go at this at the appropriate rate for their life. Your marriage, your relationships, these things are too precious to jeopardize. At some point, you'll know when to start introducing this to those who are close to you and speaking more openly about it. It doesn't need to be right at the outset of this journey. Additionally, you really don't need to announce this to the world all at once, though some brave souls certainly do. Personally, I don't think my ancient aunt needs to know that I love to wear a nice dress. It might push her pacemaker outside the safe operating parameters after all. Eventually, though, you get to a point where you realize that while you're not really a woman, it's equally true that you're also not really a man. And that is where things start to get really interesting. Don't forget to subscribe for the next episode in this series. I'm Jules Sandison for FionaDobson.com.